What if a single book was so dangerous, so powerful, that legend claims it was written in a single night with the help of the devil himself? This isn't just a fragment of some forgotten folktale. This is the story that clings to the pages of the largest surviving medieval manuscript in the world, a colossal tome known as the Codex Gigas, but feared throughout history as the Devil's Bible. Imagine a book so massive it's said to have required the skins of over 160 donkeys to create its vellum pages, a book so heavy that 2 people are needed just to lift it. For centuries, this incredible artifact has been shrouded in whispers of heresy, dark magic, and a terrifying pact that defies all rational explanation. Its very existence challenges our understanding of medieval history, pushing the boundaries of human capability and plunging us into a world where faith and fear were inextricably linked. We are about to embark on an investigative journey into the heart of this enigma, to separate the chilling myths from the verifiable truths and to confront the central, haunting question: could such a monumental work truly be the product of a single, desperate man, or does the evidence point to something otherworldly? This book is more than just parchment and ink. It is a character in its own story, a silent witness to centuries of upheaval, war, and superstition. Within its giant covers lies a complete Latin Vulgate Bible, alongside terrifyingly accurate medical texts, historical chronicles, and potent exorcism rites, a seemingly impossible combination of sacred and profane knowledge bound together. But the most infamous page, the one that has fueled its diabolical reputation for over 800 years, is a full-page, haunting illustration of the devil himself, sitting alone in a stark, empty landscape. This image is so powerful, so unsettling, that it's said to have caused monks to avoid being in the same room as the book, fearful of its corrupting influence. The very air around the Codex Gigas feels heavy with its unresolved past, a past we are going to carefully unpack, piecing together clues from its tumultuous journey across Europe, from its creation in a Bohemian monastery to its eventual resting place as a stolen prize of war in Stockholm. So prepare to join me on a deep dive into one of history's most captivating and eerie artifacts. We will examine the forensic evidence left by its scribe, analyze the chilling consistency of its handwriting that suggests a superhuman feat of endurance, and weigh the medieval accounts of its supernatural origins against the cold, hard facts we can verify today. This is a story about the extremes of human ambition, the power of belief, and the eternal struggle between good and evil, all captured within the pages of a single, extraordinary book. The secrets of the Devil's Bible are waiting to be uncovered, and the answers we find may be more astonishing than the legends themselves. To truly grasp the legend, you first have to appreciate the staggering reality of the object itself. Before we even open its covers, the Codex Gigas commands awe through its sheer, almost overwhelming physicality. Picture a medieval book standing 92 centimeters tall, which is about 36 inches the height of a small child. It is 50 centimeters or 20 inches wide, and when closed, its spine is a formidable 22 centimeters, nearly 9 inches thick. This is not a book you would casually tuck under your arm. It is a piece of furniture, a monolith of knowledge. Its total weight is around 75 kilograms or 165 pounds, roughly equivalent to an adult man. Handling it requires more than careful attention. It demands actual physical strength. Just turning one of its 310 vellum pages is a deliberate, two-handed effort, a reminder that you are interacting with something profoundly outside the norm. This monumental scale required an almost unimaginable investment of raw materials. The vellum, the prepared animal skin used for its pages, represents one of the most telling aspects of its creation. Experts estimate it took the hides of about 160 donkeys to produce the necessary sheets. Now consider the process. Each individual skin had to be sourced, then meticulously cleaned, dehaired, soaked, stretched, and scraped on a frame to achieve a uniform, smooth writing surface. This was not a quick task. The labor involved just in preparing the writing material before a single word was inscribed would have taken a small team of skilled parchmenters months, if not over a year, to complete. The cost of this material alone would have been astronomical, equivalent to the entire annual income of a sizable medieval estate, raising immediate questions about who funded such an endeavor and why. Then comes the ink. The manuscript is written primarily in a rich, dark brown iron gall ink, the standard for the period, but the volume used is extraordinary. To cover every one of its massive pages with text and illustrations required liters upon liters of this carefully concocted substance, made from oak galls, iron sulfate, gum arabic, and water. The scribe would have needed a constant, reliable supply, likely brewing it in large batches, and we must not forget the vibrant colors. The initial letters throughout the text are highlighted in red, blue, green, yellow, and gold, pigments that were often more expensive than gold itself, ground from minerals like azurite and vermilion and mixed with egg white or gum to create lustrous paints. The physical act of writing, of dipping a quill into an ink pot and carefully forming each letter across a landscape of skin, becomes a Herculean task when multiplied by over 300 massive pages. In the context of the 13th century, a book of this size was virtually unheard of. Most medieval manuscripts were portable, designed for study in a cloister or for prayer in a chapel. They were functional objects. The Codex Gigas, by contrast, is a statement. Its size alone suggests it was never meant to be personal. It was a display piece, a testament to the power and piety, or perhaps the notoriety, of the monastery that created it. It would have been chained to a large lectern, a central fixture in a library or church, where its imposing presence would dominate the room. Anyone who encountered it would have understood immediately that they were in the presence of something exceptional, an object that pushed the very limits of what a book could be. Its grandeur is the first and most undeniable clue that the story of the Codex Gigas is a story of extremes, setting the stage for the profound mysteries held within its colossal bindings. Now, with the immense physical reality of the book firmly in our minds, we turn to the legend that seeks to explain its impossible existence. This is the story that has echoed through the centuries, a narrative so compelling it has become inextricably fused with the manuscript itself. It centers on a solitary figure, a Benedictine monk known to us only as Herman the Recluse. In the early 13th century, within the secluded walls of a Podlagius monastery in Bohemia, Herman was said to have committed a grievous sin, a transgression so severe against his sacred vows that his fellow monks decreed his punishment. He was to be immured, sealed alive within a stone cell in the monastery walls, left to die in darkness and isolation. Facing this terrifying, slow death, Herman made a desperate plea. He promised his brothers that he would glorify his monastery forever by creating, in a single night, a monumental book that would contain the sum of all human knowledge, a Bible, an encyclopedia, and a history of the world all in one. The monks, likely viewing this as the frantic bargain of a condemned man, agreed, perhaps seeing it as a final chance for his redemption or simply humoring his delusion. As the sun set and Herman was left alone with his task, the true scale of his promise must have crashed down upon him. He had parchment, ink, and quills, but the mission was beyond any human capability. The legend tells us that as the night wore on and midnight approached, with only a fraction of a single page completed, Herman realized the futility of his efforts. In that moment of absolute despair, he turned away from divine intervention. Instead, he uttered a prayer to the fallen angel, the light-bearer himself, Lucifer. He offered his soul in exchange for the power to finish the book and save his mortal life. The stories say the devil agreed, and in a supernatural flurry, the pages were filled. The ink flowed as if by an unseen hand, the illuminations painted themselves in vibrant colors, and by the first light of dawn, the Codex Gigas stood complete, a masterpiece born from a pact with darkness. This foundational myth provides a chilling explanation for one of the manuscript's most infamous and puzzling features. According to the lore, Satan did not merely assist in the writing, he left his mark. As his signature on their terrible agreement, the devil added his own full-page portrait directly into the sacred text. This is why, to this day, a stunningly detailed and deeply unsettling illustration of the Prince of Darkness sits within the Codex, a stark and shocking contrast to the holy scriptures that surround it. The legend perfectly marries the book's physical improbability with its jarring internal contradiction, creating a complete and terrifyingly elegant story. A man facing an impossible deadline makes a deal with the ultimate evil, and the book itself becomes the damning evidence of that transaction. It's a narrative that resonates with our deepest fears about ambition, desperation, and the price of forbidden knowledge, a theme that has captivated humanity from the story of Faust to the modern day. This tale gave the book its infamous name and ensured that for centuries it was viewed not just as a curiosity, but as a genuinely dangerous object, a relic of a soul sold for the power to create a legend. Now we come to the very heart of the legend, the single most famous page in this entire colossal manuscript, the reason it earned its terrifying nickname in the first place. Flipping through the heavy vellum pages, you would suddenly come to a full, stark, and deeply unsettling illustration that commands your entire field of vision. It is not a small marginal doodle or a hidden symbol. It is a solo portrait, an entire page dedicated to the King of Hell himself. The image is deceptively simple in its composition, which only amplifies its power. Against a plain, empty background of bare parchment, the devil sits hunched and alone. He has a large, monstrous head with two sharp, prominent horns curving from his scalp. His face is a startling greenish hue, with wide, wild eyes and a mouth that seems to be fixed in a silent snarl. His torso is covered in what appears to be a rough, reddish fur or skin, and his arms and legs end not in hands and feet, but in formidable, bestial claws, two on each limb, like those of a giant bird of prey. Perhaps the most peculiar detail is the minimal clothing he wears, a small, stark white loincloth. This single piece of white fabric against his monstrous form creates a bizarre and dissonant impression, almost like a perverse mockery of purity or innocence. This depiction tells us volumes about the medieval mind and how it visualized the concept of absolute evil. The devil here is not a charming tempter or a philosophical abstraction. He is a physical, tangible monster. The claws suggest a predatory nature, an entity designed to tear and grasp. The animalistic features, the horns, the fur, the hunched posture, place him firmly outside the realm of the human and the divine, associating him with the base and the bestial. The choice of a green face is particularly telling. In medieval color symbolism, green could represent many things from nature to life, but it was also associated with poison, sickness, and things that were unnatural or corrupt. This is not a healthy, vibrant green. It is the sickly pallor of decay, a visual cue that this being is the antithesis of life and health. He isn't presented in a scene of torment or surrounded by flames. He is isolated in a void, emphasizing his role as the ultimate outsider, eternally separated from the grace and community of heaven. This portrait was designed to be instantly recognizable and to evoke a visceral reaction of fear and revulsion, a clear warning to the faithful of the monstrous reality of the enemy they faced. But the story of this page does not end with the devil alone. The true genius and the deepest mystery of the Codex Gigas lies in the deliberate layout created by its scribe. The page directly facing the portrait of Hell's ruler is its absolute opposite, a magnificent two-page spread depicting the heavenly city of Jerusalem. This is not a coincidence, it is a profound and calculated artistic statement. On one side, you have the monstrous, isolated figure of Satan in a barren wasteland. Turn the page and you are confronted with a vibrant, ordered, and beautiful vision of salvation, a walled city filled with towering churches, bustling with the redeemed and glowing with divine light. The two images are in a direct, silent conversation with each other, creating a powerful visual dichotomy of good versus evil, salvation versus damnation, and community versus desolate isolation. This deliberate pairing forces us to completely reevaluate the possible intent behind including the devil's portrait. Was it really a tribute, a signature from a dark patron? Or was it, in fact, part of a sophisticated theological lesson? By placing the ultimate symbol of evil directly opposite the ultimate symbol of divine grace, the creator of the Codex Gigas could have been visually illustrating a core tenet of Christian belief, that the power of God and the hope of heaven are defined by and are infinitely greater than the threat of hell. The devil is shown as powerful and frightening, yes, but he is also contained, literally boxed in by the sacred texts that surround him and directly contrasted with the glorious promise on the facing page. He becomes a conquered foe, a warning whose very presence serves to highlight the magnificence of the alternative. This transforms the book from a potential object of dark magic into a powerful tool of orthodox instruction and spiritual warfare. The very act of confronting this terrifying image while having the heavenly city just a page turn away could have been intended as an exercise in faith, a reminder that even the greatest horrors are powerless before the promise of divine salvation. This brilliant, contrasting layout is the most compelling evidence we have that the mind behind the Codex Gigas was not a heretic, but a deeply sophisticated, if unorthodox, theologian who understood the profound power of visual symbolism. Opening the massive covers of the Codex Gigas reveals a world far beyond a simple holy book. It's a sprawling, self-contained universe of medieval thought. While its foundational text is indeed the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, containing both the Old and New Testaments, this was merely the cornerstone of a much grander intellectual project. The creator, or creators, assembled a collection of works designed to provide a monastery with every piece of knowledge deemed essential for its operation, from salvation and history to healing and daily timekeeping. This was intended to be a complete library in a single volume, a one-stop shop for spiritual, historical, and practical wisdom, ensuring that even the most remote monastery could possess a foundational encyclopedia of the known world. Immediately following the biblical texts, the manuscript takes a fascinating turn into secular history with the inclusion of Jewish antiquities by the 1st century Roman Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. This is a critical addition. Josephus's work provides a historical account of the Jewish people from the creation narrative in Genesis up to the outbreak of the Great Revolt against Rome. For medieval monks, this wasn't just an ancient history. It was vital context for understanding the world of the Old Testament and the political landscape into which Jesus was born. It connected their sacred scriptures to a verifiable historical timeline, blending faith with a classical sense of record-keeping and lending an air of scholarly authority to their entire library. Then the focus shifts dramatically from the ancient Holy Land to the manuscript's own backyard. It contains the Chronicle of Bohemia by Cosmas of Prague, a detailed history of the Czech lands from their mythical origins up to the author's own time in the early 12th century. This is where the Codex Gigas transforms from a universal library into a deeply personal, localized document. By including Cosmas's chronicle, the book roots itself firmly in the soil of Bohemia. It chronicles the deeds of local kings, the founding of bishoprics, and the history of the very monastic communities that would have used the book. This wasn't just academic, it was about identity, giving the monks a sense of their place in a grand narrative that stretched from the creation of the world to the recent events of their own region. Perhaps most surprisingly practical is the collection of medical texts. In an age where illness was often seen as a spiritual affliction, the Codex Gigas provides remarkably direct physical remedies. These sections include descriptions of various herbs, instructions for preparing poultices and potions, and even guides for diagnosing ailments based on symptoms. There is a fascinating duality here. The book offers prayers and exorcisms for spiritual healing right alongside practical advice for treating a fever or a wound. This reflects the medieval world view perfectly, where the natural and supernatural were inextricably linked, and a complete reference work needed to address both the state of the soul and the health of the body. Further enhancing its role as the institutional memory of a monastery, the Codex features a comprehensive calendar and a necrology. The calendar wasn't just for tracking days, it marked important feast days, saints' days, and agricultural cycles, structuring the entire liturgical and working year. The necrology, a list of the dead, was equally vital. It recorded the names of brethren, benefactors, and local nobles to be remembered in prayers, ensuring their souls were aided in the afterlife. This transformed the book into a living document, updated over time, that cemented the community's relationship with both the divine and its own past members. And then we have the most controversial inclusions, various spells and incantations. These are not the grandiose summoning rituals of later grimoires, but rather what scholars call practical magic. They include charms to ward off evil spirits, incantations for healing, and formulas for protection. In the context of the time, the line between a fervent prayer and a spoken spell could be incredibly thin. A charm to cure a fever might invoke the names of saints alongside specific actions, blending Christian faith with folkloric tradition. The presence of these texts doesn't necessarily indicate heresy. Instead, it shows a community seeking every possible tool for navigating a dangerous and unpredictable world, combining the power of the Church with older, deeply rooted beliefs in supernatural intervention. This astonishing compilation, from the universal to the hyper-local, from the sacred to the starkly practical, proves the Codex Gigas was never meant to be just a Bible. It was an attempt to capture the entirety of a worldview, a single volume designed to be the ultimate authority on everything from God and history to health and the hidden forces that shaped daily life. To understand why a monastery would commit to such a monumental and expensive undertaking, we need to step into the turbulent world of early 13th century Bohemia. This was not a time of quiet contemplation, but an era defined by fierce political ambition, shifting spiritual winds, and the immense power of the Church. The Kingdom of Bohemia, under the rule of the Przemyslid dynasty, was a pivotal state within the Holy Roman Empire, and its kings were maneuvering for greater influence and prestige. This political landscape directly impacted religious institutions, as monarchs and nobles lavished land and wealth upon monasteries to secure divine favor and consolidate their own power. The Benedictine order, one of the oldest and most established monastic rules in Western Europe, was a central pillar of this system. Their monasteries were not just remote spiritual retreats, they were major economic players, landlords, and centers of learning that held significant sway in both the sacred and secular realms. It is precisely within this charged atmosphere that the creation of the Codex Gigas becomes a profoundly strategic act. A project of this scale required enormous resources: the 160 donkey skins, the costly pigments, the years of dedicated labor from a scribe, and likely a team of assistants. Such an investment was far beyond the means of a poor, struggling religious house. Therefore, the most plausible historical explanation is that the manuscript was a grand prestige project, a powerful statement of a monastery's wealth, piety, and intellectual stature. In a competitive environment where different monastic orders and individual houses vied for royal patronage and the best new novices, possessing the largest manuscript in the Christian world would have been an undeniable trump card. It would have served as a magnificent advertisement, attracting pilgrims, scholars, and most importantly, generous donations from the nobility. The location of its probable creation, the Benedictine monastery in Podlages, adds another layer of intrigue. This monastery was not a giant, unshakable institution like Cluny. It was a relatively small and, by some accounts, a somewhat new and struggling foundation. For a house like Podlages, the creation of the Codex Gigas could have been a calculated, even desperate, gamble for survival and relevance. By producing a work of such breathtaking scale and scope, they could place themselves firmly on the map, proving their importance to the local bishop, the king, and God himself. It was a tangible argument for their continued existence and worth. The book's contents support this theory perfectly. By including the Chronicle of Bohemia, the manuscript directly links the monastery to the history and identity of the kingdom itself, subtly arguing for its own indispensable role in the national and spiritual life of the region. Furthermore, the early 13th century was a time of intense religious fervor and reform. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 had emphasized clerical education and the need for clear, orthodox teaching to combat heresy. A comprehensive volume containing the entire Bible, key historical works, and essential medical and liturgical texts would have been the ultimate tool for such a mission. It served as a one-stop repository of approved knowledge, a bulwark against error, and a symbol of the monastery's commitment to orthodox learning. The terrifying image of the devil, when viewed in this light, can be seen not as an act of reverence, but as a powerful, orthodox warning against the very heresy and sin the Church was fighting. The Codex Gigas, therefore, stands at the intersection of faith, politics, and economics. It is the product of a world where demonstrating spiritual devotion was also a way to secure earthly power, and where a book could be both a profound act of faith and the most brilliant public relations campaign of its age. This brings us to the most tangible piece of evidence in our entire investigation, a clue left not in ink, but in the very motion of the hand that held the quill, the handwriting of the Codex Gigas itself. For decades, scholars known as paleographers, the forensic experts of the manuscript world, have meticulously studied every stroke and curve of the letters in this giant book. Their conclusion is both startling and seemingly definitive. The vast majority of the text, from the first verse of Genesis to the final medical charm, is written in an astonishingly uniform script. This isn't just similar handwriting, it is a display of remarkable consistency in the size, spacing, slant, and pressure of the letters across hundreds of massive pages. This incredible uniformity is the single strongest piece of physical evidence supporting the core of the Herman the Recluse legend that one person, and one person alone, was responsible for the monumental task of transcription. To fully appreciate what this means, we need to consider the sheer physical and mental endurance required. Writing a medieval manuscript was not a simple act of copying. It was a grueling, full-body endeavor. The scribe would have spent countless hours hunched over a sloping desk, a quill in one hand and a knife for scraping errors in the other, under the variable light of a candle or a narrow window. The script used in the Codex Gigas is a formal, Carolingian minuscule, a clear and beautiful hand, but one that demands immense control and concentration. Every letter had to be formed with precise, deliberate movements. A single lapse in focus, a moment of fatigue, a sore hand, or a wandering mind would result in a flawed letter, a blot of ink, or an uneven line, forcing the scribe to stop and painstakingly scrape the wet ink from the precious vellum. The fact that such errors are minimal and the hand remains so relentlessly steady and consistent across the years the project must have taken points to a scribe of almost superhuman focus and dedication. It suggests an individual who had entered a state of profound meditative discipline, for whom the act of writing had become a form of worship or, as the legend implies, a desperate race against time. This incredible consistency is the bedrock of the one scribe theory. But within that very consistency, modern analysis has uncovered a fascinating nuance that adds a new layer of complexity. While the core textual hand is uniform, experts have identified subtle but distinct variations in the execution of the elaborate, colorful initials that punctuate the text. Some of these decorated letters show a slightly different artistic flair, a different approach to the foliate patterns and interlaced designs that fill them. This has led to a compelling counter-argument. Could the Codex Gigas be the product not of a lone genius, but of a highly disciplined scriptorium? In a traditional monastic workshop, multiple scribes and illuminators would work together on a single book, but they would all be trained to adhere to a strict house style, a set of rules governing exactly how each letter should be formed. Under the watchful eye of a master scribe, a team could, in theory, produce a manuscript that appears visually consistent to the naked eye. The primary scribe would have written the overwhelming majority of the text, ensuring the foundational uniformity, while a small number of specialized artists were brought in to execute the more intricate illuminated initials, accounting for the slight stylistic shifts we observe. So we are left with two plausible scenarios, each with its own powerful logic. The first is the romantic, almost mythical figure of the solitary scribe, a monk like Herman, who through sheer force of will and devotion, or perhaps driven by a terrifying ultimatum, channeled a lifetime of labor into a single, concentrated period. This individual would have lived and breathed the Codex, his entire world shrinking to the dimensions of a single page, his identity becoming inseparable from the text he was creating. The second scenario is one of brilliant, organized collaboration. A master scribe, the project's director and primary executor, could have been supported by a small team that prepared the vellum, mixed the inks, and added the flourishes of color, all working in perfect harmony to create a unified masterpiece. This doesn't diminish the achievement. In many ways, it makes it more historically grounded. It transforms the story from a superhuman feat into a monumental act of human cooperation and institutional will. Whether the work of one indomitable hand or a perfectly synchronized team, the handwriting of the Codex Gigas remains a silent, powerful testament to a level of dedication that borders on the incomprehensible, forever blurring the line between human capability and legendary obsession. The very ink and pigments used to bring the Codex Gigas to life serve as a kind of chemical fingerprint, a silent witness to its creation that speaks a different truth than the whispered tales of a demonic pact. While the legend speaks of supernatural assistance, the physical evidence points us toward a complex web of medieval trade, sophisticated chemical knowledge, and immense human labor. The vast majority of the text is written in a rich, dark brown ink that has remained remarkably stable for 8 centuries. This is iron gall ink, the standard writing fluid of the medieval world, but its consistent quality and volume in the Codex are anything but ordinary. Creating this ink was a precise science. It required gathering oak galls, which are abnormal growths on oak trees formed by wasp larvae. These galls are packed with tannic acid, which, when crushed and mixed with iron sulfate, a green crystalline salt often known as copperas, creates a chemical reaction. The resulting liquid was then combined with gum arabic, a sap from the acacia tree, which acted as a binder to make the ink adhere properly to the vellum. The scribe would have needed a near-industrial supply of these ingredients, processing them in large batches to ensure the color remained consistent across every one of the 310 giant pages. A single batch inconsistency would have been glaringly obvious, a flaw that simply does not appear, revealing a meticulous, controlled production process that spanned years. Beyond the monochrome text, the vibrant illuminations and decorated initials tell an even more colorful story of global reach and significant expense. The brilliant reds that highlight important passages and frame illustrations come from 2 primary sources. One is red lead, also known as minium, a pigment manufactured by carefully heating white lead, a process that required a skilled alchemist's touch. The other is vermilion, a much more costly and spectacular red derived from the mineral cinnabar. The finest cinnabar in the medieval period often came from the famous mines in Almudena, Spain, meaning this single color potentially represents a long and expensive trade route stretching across the continent. The blues, used for the robes of saints and the heavenly skies in the heavenly city illustration, were likely derived from azurite, a semi-precious stone mined in places like Hungary or Saxony. This mineral had to be carefully ground, with the finest particles reserved for the most vibrant blues, while coarser grains produced a paler, cheaper shade. The presence of such specific, high-quality minerals acts as a powerful geographic marker, anchoring the manuscript's creation to a location with access to major European trade networks, a far cry from an isolated monk working in a single night. Then there is the most telling element of all, gold. The Codex Gigas features lustrous, shimmering gold leaf applied to its initials, catching the light and declaring the book's immense value with every glint. Applying gold leaf was one of the most delicate and expensive processes in medieval bookmaking. First, a sticky base called mordant, often made from gum ammoniac or glare egg white, was painted onto the vellum in the desired shape. Then, using a special knife and a soft brush, the illuminator would lift a tissue-thin sheet of gold, so thin that a single gram could be hammered into a sheet over a meter square, and gently lay it onto the sticky surface. Any misstep would ruin both the gold and the precious vellum beneath. The cost of the gold alone, not to mention the artisan's specialized skill, represented a massive financial investment, likely funded by a wealthy patron or the pooled resources of an entire monastery. This isn't the stuff of a quick, desperate bargain. It is the hallmark of a planned, well-funded, and prestigious project intended to showcase wealth and piety for generations. Modern scientists and art historians use techniques like X-ray fluorescence (XRF) and Raman spectroscopy to perform a kind of chemical archaeology on these materials. By bombarding the pages with harmless, high-energy rays, they can detect the unique elemental signatures of the pigments without ever touching the manuscript. The specific chemical composition of the azurite blue or the trace impurities in the vermilion red can sometimes be traced back to their original mines. This analysis provides tangible, earthly evidence that directly contrasts with the supernatural legend. It shows us that the Codex Gigas was not a miraculous creation, but a masterwork of its time, built from materials sourced through established trade routes, prepared with known chemical processes, and assembled with painstaking human skill. Every bottle of iron gall ink, every precious lump of azurite, and every delicate sheet of gold leaf tells a story of commerce, craftsmanship, and colossal ambition, painting a picture of its origin that is, in many ways, even more remarkable than the myth of its diabolical birth. Despite the incredible effort to preserve knowledge within its massive covers, the Codex Gigas itself bears the scars of a later, deliberate act of censorship. Scattered throughout the volume are the ghostly evidence of missing content. Several pages have been neatly, surgically cut from the very heart of the binding. These aren't pages that simply fell out due to wear and tear. The cuts are clean and straight, made with a sharp blade that sliced through the sturdy vellum. This was an intentional, targeted removal, and the location of these missing folios is perhaps the most telling clue of all. The excised pages were located right at the core of the manuscript, in a section that would have logically contained the foundational text for any Benedictine monastery, the Rule of Saint Benedict. This rule, written by Benedict of Nursia in the 6th century, was the constitutional document for monastic life in the West. It spelled out everything from the daily schedule of prayers and manual labor to the hierarchical structure of the community and the specific virtues required of a monk. For a book intended to be a complete library for a monastic house, the absence of this crucial text is not just odd, it's deeply suspicious. Its removal suggests that someone, at some point after the book's completion, felt that the content of those specific pages was a liability. The most compelling theory is that the pages were cut out to conceal the identity of the monastery that created the Codex Gigas. The Rule of Saint Benedict was often copied with a unique local prologue or contained specific annotations and customs particular to an individual monastery. If the Podlages monastery, which was dissolved not long after the book's creation, had its own distinct version of the rule recorded in the Codex, a later owner, perhaps a rival monastic house or a new secular owner, might have wanted to erase that connection, to literally cut the book's original identity out of its history and claim it as their own. However, another, more tantalizing possibility exists. What if the pages weren't removed to hide the monastery's identity, but to hide something written on them? The rule itself was orthodox and universally accepted, but the margins of medieval manuscripts were often filled with glosses, notes, commentary, and personal interpretations added by scribes and readers over time. It is entirely plausible that a later monk, or even the original scribe, had written heretical thoughts or controversial annotations in the margins of these pages. In an age where unorthodox beliefs could lead to severe punishment, a subsequent owner discovering such dangerous commentary might have chosen to remove the entire page rather than face accusations of harboring heresy. The act of cutting them out becomes a form of self-censorship, an attempt to purge the book of any content that could bring its owners under suspicion. There is also a more pragmatic, if less dramatic, explanation. High-quality vellum was an incredibly valuable commodity. In later centuries, it was not uncommon for pages from older manuscripts to be removed and reused. The blank sides might be scraped and written on again, creating a palimpsest, or the vellum could be repurposed for book bindings or even as stiffening material for clothing. Yet, this theory feels less convincing for the Codex Gigas. The cuts are precise and confined to specific, consecutive leaves, suggesting a targeted removal of content rather than a random harvesting of material. Furthermore, the sheer effort required to access and slice pages from the tightly bound spine of such a heavy book indicates a strong motivation. Someone went to significant trouble to ensure that whatever was on those pages would never be seen again. This physical act of erasure, this void in the middle of the world's largest book, paradoxically speaks louder than the surrounding text. It confirms that the history of the Codex Gigas did not end with its creation. It was an active, contested object, and its secrets were considered dangerous enough to be literally carved out of existence, leaving behind a permanent, silent question mark in its binding. After surviving the political and religious upheavals of its Bohemian homeland, the Codex Gigas embarked on the next, most perilous chapter of its existence, a journey from a sacred library to a spoil of war. For centuries, it had been a treasured possession, moving from its probable birthplace at the Podlages monastery to the Benedictine monastery in Brevnov, and eventually finding a place of honor within the formidable walls of Prague Castle. There it was studied and safeguarded until the storm of the 30 Years' War broke across Europe. This devastating conflict, which raged from 1618 to 1648, pitted Protestant against Catholic powers in a struggle for political and religious dominance. In 1648, as the war neared its end, the victorious Swedish army laid siege to Prague. The great castle, a symbol of Habsburg power, was a primary target. And in the summer of 1649, as part of the peace negotiations, the Swedish forces systematically looted the city's most precious artistic and intellectual treasures, carrying them away in what remains one of the largest and most culturally significant seizures of war booty in history. Among the countless paintings, artifacts, and books hauled north in ox carts was the colossal Codex Gigas, a silent captive taken not for its spiritual content, but as a trophy of a triumphant military campaign. Its new home was the court of the extraordinary and enigmatic Queen Christina of Sweden. An avid collector and a voracious intellectual, Christina amassed a spectacular library, and the Codex Gigas, with its immense size and fearsome reputation, became one of her most prized acquisitions. It fit perfectly within her cabinet of curiosities, a physical embodiment of the obscure and the marvelous that she so passionately sought. However, her reign was short-lived. Just 5 years after acquiring the manuscript, the queen abdicated her throne, converted to Catholicism, and moved to Rome. In the dispersal of her personal collections, the Codex, along with the rest of the royal library, was transferred to the custody of the Swedish state, finding a permanent home in what would become the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. There it was catalogued simply as Codex Gigas, or the Giant Book, its dark nickname temporarily set aside in official records, though its legend continued to simmer among scholars and the public. For the next 3.5 centuries, the manuscript remained in Stockholm, an object of academic study and awed speculation, largely inaccessible to the people of the land that had created it. Then, in 2007, an event of profound cultural significance occurred. After extensive diplomatic negotiations and painstaking conservation work, the Swedish government agreed to loan the Codex Gigas to the Czech Republic for a brief, landmark exhibition. The logistics were a monumental undertaking. Transporting a 165-pound, 800-year-old manuscript required a custom-built, climate-controlled crate, secure armored transport, and a team of expert conservators accompanying it every step of the way. Its arrival in Prague was treated with the reverence of a national homecoming. Displayed under heavy security and carefully controlled light at the Czech National Library, the Devil's Bible became a sensation. Over just a few weeks, more than 60,000 people waited in lines that stretched for hours for a chance to gaze upon the legendary book for just a few moments. They were not just seeing a historical document, they were confronting a cornerstone of their own national heritage, a piece of their history that had been lost for centuries and was now temporarily returned. This dramatic homecoming did more than just satisfy public curiosity. It rekindled a deep, emotional connection between the Czech people and this enigmatic artifact. For many, it was a powerful symbol of resilience, a tangible link to a pre-war past that had been violently interrupted. The exhibition also provided a unique opportunity for a new generation of Czech and international scientists to conduct non-invasive analyses, using advanced imaging techniques to learn more about its pigments and the secrets of its construction without ever touching a page. When the manuscript was finally carefully repacked and shipped back to its long-term home in Stockholm, it left behind a transformed legacy. It was no longer just a Swedish library holding or a subject of obscure legends. It was now a shared European treasure, its story a poignant reminder of how the tides of war and history can scatter a nation's cultural soul, and how, even for a brief moment, that soul can come home. Just when it seemed the Codex Gigas had found a safe and permanent home within the Swedish Royal Library, destiny intervened with a force as primal and destructive as the devil depicted on its most famous page. The year was 1697, and the manuscript was housed in the magnificent Tre-Krona Castle, the very heart of Swedish royal power and the repository of the nation's most precious documents. On the 7th of May, a seemingly routine task, the fitting of new stovepipes in the castle's architecture, sparked a catastrophe. A fire broke out, and fueled by a strong wind and the castle's largely wooden structure, it quickly transformed into an uncontrollable inferno. The flames tore through the royal apartments, the state halls, and terrifyingly, the library. As the blaze consumed centuries of history, court officials and librarians faced a horrifying choice: abandon the nation's cultural treasures to the flames or risk their lives in a desperate rescue mission. In the chaos of smoke and collapsing timbers, the fate of the Codex Gigas hung in the balance. Its immense size and weight, which had always made it difficult to handle, now posed an almost insurmountable problem. How do you evacuate a 165-pound book from a burning building when every second counts? The legend that has come down to us, passed through historical accounts, is both dramatic and strangely fitting. It's said that in a moment of inspired desperation, a librarian or a soldier seized the giant tome and, rather than attempt to carry it down smoky, crumbling staircases, hurled it through a window to the ground below. Imagine the sight of this massive volume, this legendary Devil's Bible, tumbling through the air, its heavy wooden boards and metal clasps spinning before crashing onto the cobblestones or a soft patch of earth. This single, violent act of salvation likely spared the Codex from being reduced to ashes, but it came at a cost. The impact of that fall is widely believed by conservators to be the direct cause of the physical damage we can still observe today. Several pages that were tragically loosened from the binding and lost forever, and the subtle warping of its structure that makes every turn of a page a delicate operation. The fire was a national tragedy for Sweden, destroying vast portions of the royal archives and countless other invaluable manuscripts and artifacts. That the Codex Gigas survived at all was nothing short of miraculous. This brush with oblivion added an entirely new layer to its already complex mythology. For those who believed in its diabolical origins, its survival against such impossible odds felt less like luck and more like a dark providence. Was the book saved by human courage, or was it protected by a power that was not yet finished with it? The fire seemed to echo the legendary narrative of its creation, a story defined by a desperate pact and a last-minute rescue from certain death. This parallel was not lost on contemporary observers, who saw the event as further proof that the manuscript existed outside the normal flow of history, perpetually dancing on the edge of destruction only to be pulled back at the final moment. Looking at the manuscript today, this event transforms it from a static historical object into a dynamic survivor. Every slight imperfection in its binding, every missing page, tells a story not just of monastic creation, but of a violent, fiery night in Stockholm. The damage it sustained is not a flaw to be lamented, but a badge of honor, a physical scar that bears witness to its incredible journey. This near distinction profoundly shapes how we, as modern viewers, are meant to perceive the book. It is no longer merely a collection of texts. It is a relic that has endured the trials of war, theft, censorship, and elemental fire. Its continued existence feels like a defiance of entropy itself, a stubborn refusal to fade from history. This aura of survival against all odds, both natural and supernatural, cements Codex Gigas not just as a marvel of medieval craftsmanship, but as one of history's great escape artists, an object that seems to carry within its pages a fierce, unyielding will to endure. For centuries, the secrets of the Codex Gigas were locked away, accessible only through the careful observation of the naked eye and the educated guesses of historians. But in the early 2000s, a new chapter in its investigation began, one where the tools of modern forensic science could be applied to this medieval enigma, allowing the book to speak for itself in ways its creator could never have imagined. The first major scientific quest was to definitively answer the most basic question: when was it actually made? While historical context and artistic style pointed to the early 13th century, the exact date was still an educated assumption. To move beyond assumption, researchers turned to a powerful technique known as radiocarbon dating. This process involves analyzing the minute amounts of radioactive carbon-14 isotope present in all organic materials. Since this isotope decays at a steady, measurable rate after an organism dies, scientists can calculate the time that has elapsed by measuring how much remains. A tiny, carefully selected sample of the vellum, a fragment smaller than a fingernail clipping, was taken from the edge of one of the pages. The results were precise and revealing. The organic material dated to between the years 1200 and 1230, a finding that powerfully corroborated the historical timeline and firmly anchored the manuscript's creation in the first third of the 13th century, silencing any lingering speculation about a later, more fanciful origin. Yet the most breathtaking advances in understanding the Codex came not from sampling its materials, but from looking at its pages in an entirely new light. Multispectral imaging, a technology once reserved for espionage and planetary science, has become one of the most revolutionary tools in the art conservator's arsenal. The principle is both simple and brilliant. Instead of just capturing the light our eyes can see, sophisticated cameras record multiple images of the same page, each captured at a different wavelength of light, from ultraviolet and infrared to various bands within the visible spectrum. Different materials, whether they are different types of ink, underlying sketches, or erased text, absorb and reflect these wavelengths in unique ways. By combining and analyzing these layered images with powerful software, researchers can effectively peel back the visible surface of the page to reveal a hidden world of creation and revision beneath. So, what secrets did this high-tech gaze uncover? While the quest for a literal hidden message, a secret code, or an incriminating confession from Herman the Recluse proved elusive, the imaging revealed something arguably more valuable: the human process behind the masterpiece. It illuminated the subtle, ghostly traces of the scribe's preparatory work. Across many pages, the multispectral analysis detected faint underdrawings and guidelines, the architectural blueprint for the text and illuminations. These were not the confident strokes of a demonic hand working at supernatural speed, but the careful, measured planning of a meticulous craftsman. The presence of these guidelines is a powerful argument against the single-night creation myth. Such painstaking preparation is the hallmark of a deliberate, time-consuming project, not a frantic, last-minute dash. Furthermore, this technology has offered fresh insights into the enduring debate over the number of scribes. The imaging can detect minute variations in the chemical composition of the iron gall ink that are invisible to the human eye. If multiple scribes had been at work, each potentially using their own personally mixed batch of ink, these subtle chemical signatures would likely show clear, abrupt shifts corresponding to different hands. The preliminary evidence, however, continues to point toward an astonishing consistency in the ink used throughout the vast majority of the text, heavily supporting the dominant theory of a single primary scribe. Where the imaging does show more complexity is in the colorful illuminations. The variations in the application of pigments and the execution of the decorated initials, now visible in minute detail, strongly suggest the involvement of a second, specialized artist, an illuminator who focused solely on adding the vibrant colors and gold leaf once the primary text was complete. This paints a picture not of a solitary monk, but of a small, coordinated team, a master scribe supported by at least one artistic collaborator. This bridge between ancient mystery and modern science fundamentally transforms our relationship with the Codex Gigas. We are no longer passive observers of a static relic. We have become active investigators, using the tools of the 21st century to conduct a non-invasive archaeological dig into its very pages. The scientific findings do not dispel the manuscript's aura of wonder, they deepen it. They replace the supernatural legend of a demonic pact with a more profound, human story of immense skill, profound dedication, and meticulously planned collaboration. Every spectral image and calibrated date reinforces the conclusion that the true magic of the Codex Gigas lies not in the occult, but in the staggering heights of human achievement possible even in an age of candlelight and quills. So within this immense volume, sitting just pages away from the Word of God and the histories of kings, we find something that feels startlingly immediate and personal. A detailed guide to navigating the dangers of illness and misfortune in the 13th century. These medical texts and spells are not mere footnotes. They are a direct portal into the medieval worldview, where a fever could be both a physical ailment and a spiritual attack, and where the remedy might require both a herbal poultice and a potent spoken charm. This section of the Codex Gigas reveals a world without our modern distinction between science and superstition, a world where every aspect of life was intertwined with the unseen. To understand these pages is to understand the daily fears and hopes of the people who created and used this book, and to see why its contents could be seen as both profoundly pious and dangerously unorthodox. Let us examine a few specific examples to hear the unique voice of this era. One spell intended to cure a fever doesn't just list ingredients, it provides a full ritual. The healer is instructed to approach the afflicted person while reciting a specific Latin prayer, perhaps invoking the power of the Trinity or the intercession of a saint. Then they might be told to write a sacred name or a series of magical symbols, known as characters, onto a piece of vellum. This inscribed parchment would then be dissolved in water or wine, transforming the liquid into a medicinal potion for the sick person to drink. Here, the act of writing itself is seen as a magical act, transferring spiritual power from the page into the body. The healing power comes not just from the physical substance, but from the divine authority invoked through the written and spoken word. Another entry might detail a cure for a common ailment like a toothache, combining the practical application of a numbing herb like henbane with an incantation that commands the pain to depart, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The physical and the spiritual are treated as two fronts in the same battle against suffering. This blending is the most fascinating aspect of these texts. They are a perfect syncretism of official church doctrine and persistent folk tradition. The prayers are orthodox, but their application veers into territory that church authorities often struggle to control. For instance, an exorcism formula in the Codex doesn't just command a demon to leave in the name of Jesus. It might also include a series of mysterious, powerful-sounding words that are not Latin, but are believed to have inherent power, words like agramma or tetragrammaton. These are voces mysticae, mystical words whose power was thought to lie in their sound and mystery rather than their literal meaning. Their inclusion shows that the monks who compiled this book were tapping into a much older, universal tradition of magical language, one that predated Christianity but was now being harnessed for a Christian purpose. They were effectively sanctifying older pagan practices, baptizing them into the service of the Church. This very act of blending is what placed the Codex Gigas in a deeply ambiguous and potentially heretical position. From the perspective of a local monk or a village healer, these spells were perfectly logical. They were using every tool at their disposal, the authoritative power of the Church's liturgy and the ancient, proven power of folk magic, to protect and heal their community. This was practical theology in action. However, from the viewpoint of a bishop or a papal inquisitor, this was a dangerous corruption. The Church held that miracles and healing could only come through the grace of God, channeled through the official sacraments and the intercession of saints. To suggest that a specific combination of words written in a particular way could compel a spiritual entity to act smacked of witchcraft. It treated divine power as a force that could be manipulated through correct ritual technique, much like a magical spell rather than a gift granted through faith and piety. This is the core of the accusation of superstition, the belief that rituals have automatic power independent of God's will. Therefore, the presence of these spells and medical charms in the Codex Gigas is a large part of what fueled its dangerous reputation. It wasn't just the terrifying portrait of the devil. It was the fact that the book provided the actual instructions for practices that sat on the very blurry line between accepted religion and forbidden occultism. A suspicious authority could easily point to these pages and argue that the monastery that created it was dabbling in forces it shouldn't be, mixing the holy with the profane in a way that undermined church doctrine. The book wasn't just a passive repository of knowledge, it was an active manual that, in the wrong hands, could be used to perform rituals that looked very much like magic. This inherent tension between faith and folk practice, between sanctioned prayer and unsanctioned spellcasting, is locked within these pages, making the Codex Gigas not just a giant book, but a giant question mark about what was truly acceptable in the complex spiritual landscape of the Middle Ages. But to move beyond these grand theories and into the realm of verifiable fact, we must look to one of the most personal and telling sections of the entire codex, its calendar and necrology. This is where the colossal, seemingly impersonal book reveals its human fingerprints, where we find the names of the very people who lived with it, prayed over it, and for whom it was created as a spiritual anchor. The calendar itself is far more than a simple list of days. It is the liturgical heartbeat of a monastic community, mapping out the rhythm of the entire year through a carefully curated selection of saints' feast days. Each entry is a small window into the devotional priorities of this specific group of monks, highlighting which saints they held in the highest esteem. But the true historical goldmine lies in the necrology that follows a solemn list of the dead who are to be commemorated with prayers on the anniversaries of their passing. This roster transforms the manuscript from an abstract masterpiece into a deeply local document, a memorial for a specific community. And it is within this list of names that researchers have found the most compelling, tangible clues to the book's origin. Interwoven with universally venerated saints like Saint Benedict and Saint Augustine are the names of Bohemian saints, local holy men like Saint Procopius, the founder of the Sazava monastery, and Saint Adalbert, the Bishop of Prague and a martyr who became a patron saint of the entire region. These inclusions immediately tether the calendar to the soil of Bohemia, but the evidence becomes even more precise. The necrology records the death dates of specific individuals, many of whom were abbots, monks, and noble benefactors with known connections to particular monastic houses. When scholars cross-referenced these names with other surviving historical records, a clear pattern emerged. A significant number of the individuals listed held positions or were known patrons of the Benedictine monastery of Podlages. It's as if we've discovered a historical guestbook signed by the very community that commissioned and used the giant book, with each name acting as a signature that points back to its home. This allows us to reconstruct a far more intimate picture of the Codex Gigas' early life. We can now envision it not as a mythical object born from a demonic pact, but as a central fixture in the daily life of the Podlages monastery. Its sheer physical presence would have dominated the scriptorium or the choir. The monks would have gathered around it, their voices chanting the psalms and lessons it contained. They would have consulted its medical texts when a brother fell ill, its historical chronicles to understand their place in the world, and its calendar to know which saint to honor each day. Most poignantly, they would have used its necrology to remember their departed friends and patrons, speaking the names of the dead aloud to ensure their souls were not forgotten by God. This connection to Podlages also clarifies the book's eventual journey. The monastery was dissolved not long after the Codex was completed, likely explaining why it was transferred to the larger, more powerful Benedictine house at Brevnov and later to Prague Castle, beginning its long and turbulent journey across Europe. This evidence from the calendar and necrology is arguably the single most important piece of the historical puzzle. It provides the who and the where that grounds all the other fascinating speculation. While the legend of Herman the Recluse offers a thrilling narrative of supernatural intervention, the names in the back of the book tell a different but no less powerful story. They speak of a community investing an immense amount of its collective resources, time, and faith into creating something that would endure, a monument to their belief and their identity. The Codex Gigas, therefore, stands as a bridge between the anonymous craftsman and the known community, between a fantastic legend and a verifiable history, reminding us that even the most colossal and mysterious artifacts are ultimately the products of human hands and human hearts. Now, let's take the legend of that single, desperate night and hold it up against the unyielding light of reality. If you were to actually sit down and do the math, the romantic story of Herman's supernatural sprint begins to unravel at an astonishing speed. Let's break it down with some simple arithmetic. The Codex Gigas contains approximately 310 massive pages of text, conservatively estimating that's around 160 characters of dense Latin script per line and roughly 40 lines to a page. Multiply that out and you're looking at a total character count well into the millions. Now, imagine a single scribe with a quill. Even the most skilled, practiced hand could only manage a few characters per second under ideal conditions. To fill every single page in a 24-hour period, the scribe would have had to write roughly 1.5 lines every single second, without a single moment of pause for an entire day and night. That means no rest, no food, no blinking, no sharpening the quill, no stretching a cramped hand, just an uninterrupted, superhuman flow of ink. The physical act alone is a biological impossibility. The human body and mind simply could not sustain that level of precise, focused output. But that's only the beginning of the impossibility. Our calculation only covers the act of writing the standard text. It completely ignores the monumental tasks that would have had to occur before the quill ever touched the page. Who prepared the 160 donkey skins, transforming them into smooth, uniform vellum? That process of soaking, stretching, scraping, and drying would have taken a team of parchmenters many, many months. Who mixed the vast quantities of iron gall ink, ensuring its consistent color and viscosity across the entire manuscript? Who ground the precious azurite and vermilion into the brilliant paints for the illuminations? Who painstakingly applied the delicate sheets of gold leaf to the ornate initials? Each of these steps was a specialized, time-consuming craft in itself. The legend condenses years of meticulous, collaborative labor into a single, frantic evening, a compression so extreme it defies not just human endurance, but the very nature of medieval craftsmanship. When we move from the realm of dramatic myth to the careful analysis of historians and paleographers, a completely different yet equally awe-inspiring timeline emerges. The scholarly consensus based on the analysis of the script's development, the historical context of the included texts, and the radiocarbon dating of the vellum points toward a creation period of 20 to 30 years. This is not a random guess, it is a timeline that aligns perfectly with the rhythms of medieval monastic life. Think about that for a moment, 20 years. That is a substantial portion of a person's adult life, a dedicated daily practice spanning decades. This transforms the narrative from a shocking supernatural event into a profound story of human devotion and staggering long-term commitment. The anonymous scribe, whether he was Herman or another devoted brother, likely woke up every day for 20 or 30 years and returned to the same massive desk, to the same growing stack of vellum, to the same patient, deliberate formation of letters. This was a marathon of the spirit, a lifetime's work offered up as a form of worship or as a definitive testament to his monastery's legacy. This stark contrast between the thrilling, instant gratification of the demonic pact and the slow, grinding reality of decades of labor is the true turning point in understanding the Codex Gigas. The myth provides a simple, exciting answer to a complex question. It appeals to our desire for dramatic, supernatural explanations for things that seem beyond human comprehension. The reality, however, asks us to appreciate a different kind of magic. The magic of immense patience, of unwavering discipline, and of a faith so deep that a person would willingly dedicate the prime of their life to a single, silent, back-breaking task. One story gives us a quick, fiery narrative of sin and salvation. The other offers a quiet, humbling lesson in the power of incremental, persistent effort. The truth behind the Codex Gigas may lack the devilish flair of the legend, but in its own way, the reality of a single monk's lifetime of work is an achievement so monumental, it borders on the miraculous itself. But this investigation into the book's true origins would be incomplete without confronting the identity of its most famous character, the man at the very heart of its darkest legend. We must now ask the most fundamental historical question: who was Herman the Recluse, and is there any evidence he was a real person at all? The story of the sinful monk saved by a diabolical deal is a compelling narrative engine, but when we journey back to the historical record of 13th century Bohemia and meticulously scour the available monastic documents, a startling void appears. There are no contemporary chronicles, no letters, no official monastery ledgers from Podlages or any surrounding Benedictine houses that mention a monk named Herman being punished for a grave sin. No record exists of an immurement sentence, an event so extreme it would have certainly been noted as a cautionary tale. Even the comprehensive necrology within the Codex Gigas itself, which lists so many other names of abbots and brothers for prayerful remembrance, is completely silent on a Herman. This absolute lack of a paper trail for the legend's protagonist is, for historians, deafening. This absence strongly suggests that the figure of Herman the Recluse is not a lost historical person, but rather a classic folkloric archetype, a character created by later generations to make sense of something that defied their understanding. In the centuries following the book's creation, as its true origins in the defunct Podlages monastery faded from living memory, the Codex Gigas would have remained a colossal, bewildering object of unknown provenance. People would have stood before it, dwarfed by its physical scale and confounded by the shocking contrast between its holy texts and its terrifying devil portrait. The human mind instinctively seeks narratives to explain anomalies, and the most satisfying explanation for something that seems impossible is a story that is itself supernatural. The legend of a desperate monk and a devil's pact provides a complete and emotionally resonant package. It explains the book's immense size through a supernatural feat. It justifies the devil's image as a literal signature, and it wraps everything in a timeless moral fable about ambition, sin, and the cost of forbidden knowledge. Herman is the necessary human anchor for this supernatural tale, a flawed everyman whose desperation makes the unthinkable bargain relatable. The name Herman itself offers another intriguing clue. It is a Germanic name that was certainly present in the region, but its specific use here might be more symbolic than factual. The term, the recluse, is even more telling. In a monastic context, a recluse was often someone who had withdrawn from the community for a life of extreme asceticism and prayer, sometimes even being walled into a small cell adjacent to a church of voluntary immurement in a sense. This creates a fascinating parallel. The legend may have taken the concept of a pious, solitary religious figure and inverted it into a punishment for a sinner. The story transforms a spiritual ideal into a penal sentence, twisting a recognized form of devotion into a narrative of damnation. It's possible that over time, vague memories of a particularly devout hermit named Herman associated with the region fused with the puzzle of the giant book, eventually crystallizing into the full-blown legend we know today. Therefore, the enduring power of the Codex Gigas doesn't come from a hidden historical truth about its scribe, but from the very fact that its main character is a ghost. The absence of Herman from the official record is what allowed the myth to flourish unchecked, to be embellished and refined as the book passed from owner to owner, each adding their own layer to the story. This process transformed the manuscript from a mere book into a character in its own ongoing drama. The legend became an inseparable part of its identity, a narrative shroud that made it far more than the sum of its vellum and ink. It became an object of fear, fascination, and immense cultural value precisely because its origin story was so perfectly, poetically unsettling. The mystery of its creation, left unanswered by documents, was filled by the human imagination with a story powerful enough to match the object's own imposing presence. In the end, the silent void where Herman the Recluse should be is not a historical dead end, but the very source of the legend's timeless and captivating power. This brings us to the most intimate mystery of the Codex Gigas, one that moves beyond the physical evidence of ink and vellum and into the silent, unreachable mind of the scribe himself. We have established the timeline 20, perhaps 30 years of daily, unrelenting labor. we can analyze the consistency of his hand, the precision of his lines. But these facts only lead us to a more profound and haunting question. What kind of person dedicates the prime of their life, every waking hour, to a task of such monumental scale and excruciating monotony? What internal force could possibly fuel a focus so absolute that it left behind a work of nearly machined perfection across millions of individual letters? To understand this, we must venture into the psychological landscape of a medieval monk, exploring the powerful and sometimes pathological drives that could compel a human being to such an extreme act of creation. One compelling lens through which to view this dedication is that of religious scrupulosity, a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder focused on moral or religious perfection. In the context of a 13th-century monastery, where every thought and action was meant to be oriented toward God, a mind prone to this condition could have found both its torment and its ultimate expression in the Codex Gigas. Imagine a monk so terrified of sin, so consumed by a need for atonement, that he perceived a tiny, wavering line or a subtly misplaced letter not as a simple error, but as a spiritual failure, an offense to the divine. For such an individual, the act of copying sacred text would be more than a duty. It would be a relentless, high-stakes ritual. Every perfectly formed character could provide a momentary relief from crushing spiritual anxiety, while every perceived flaw would be a source of intense distress demanding immediate correction. The manuscript in this light becomes an 800-year-old testament to a mind grappling with its own perceived imperfections, seeking order and control on the page as a way to impose order on a soul it believed was perpetually in danger. The sheer, unbroken consistency of the script could be read not just as skill, but as the output of a powerful compulsive drive, a need for perfect repetition that quieted an internal storm of doubt and fear. Yet, we cannot overlook the possibility of a more voluntary, though no less extreme, form of devotion. This project could have been conceived as a grand personal penance, a self-inflicted purgatory undertaken for a specific, grievous sin. The legend of Herman the Recluse, while historically unverified, captures a profound psychological truth: the human capacity for using immense suffering to seek redemption. What if the scribe chose this decades-long task as his own form of immurement? Instead of being sealed in a stone cell, he willingly imprisoned himself within the rigid architecture of the text. The physical suffering would have been immense: the chronic back and neck pain from hours bent over a desk, the crippling cramps in his hand and fingers, the eye strain from working in the dim, flickering light of tallow candles or a narrow window. This physical torment, endured daily, could have been interpreted as a way to burn away sin, to purify the soul through the deliberate, painful offering of the body. The book, then, is not just a library but a sprawling, intricate hair shirt, its every page a step on a long, self-directed via dolorosa towards salvation. We must also consider the profound effects of his environment and lifestyle. The monastic life was one of radical isolation, even within a community. While he may have had assistance for preparing materials, the core act of writing was inherently solitary. For decades, his primary companions would have been the whisper of the quill on vellum, the slow turning of pages, and the vast, silent thoughts in his own head. This level of sustained isolation can alter perception and deepen focus to an almost trance-like state. Modern psychologists might recognize elements of a flow state, that rare mental zone where time distorts and self-consciousness falls away, allowing for preternatural concentration. Perhaps the scribe learned to access this state at will, using the rhythmic, meditative act of writing as a gateway to a higher spiritual plane. The poor lighting would have forced his world to shrink to the small, well-lit rectangle of vellum directly before him, shutting out all distractions and making the text his entire universe. In this interpretation, the Codex Gigas is not a product of madness, but of profound mindfulness, a tangible result of a mind that had achieved an almost impossible unity of purpose. Ultimately, the true motivation likely existed in a complex interplay of all these factors: a personality predisposed to obsession, a culture that valued extreme asceticism, and a personal history that demanded a grand, tangible act of atonement. He may have been driven by a desire for legacy, a need to create something so monumental that his name, even if lost to history, would be echoed in the enduring presence of his work. He might have been fueled by a fierce, competitive pride, determined to produce a manuscript that would dwarf all others and bring unparalleled prestige to his monastery. Or it could have been the purest form of ora et labora, prayer and work, fused into a single, lifelong action where the formation of each letter was itself a silent prayer, and the completed book a permanent hymn written in skin and ink. We will never know the precise configuration of thoughts and feelings that resided in that quiet scriptorium, but the colossal object he left behind stands as a permanent mirror to the human spirit's capacity for endurance, a silent witness to the astonishing lengths to which a single mind, for reasons now forever its own, will go in its pursuit of a goal that borders on the divine. Yet when we stand back and look at the complete picture, the immense cost, the encyclopedic contents, the historical context, and the psychological portrait of its scribe, we must confront the ultimate question: what was the Codex Gigas truly for? The evidence resists a single, simple answer. Instead, it points to a multifaceted purpose where political ambition, spiritual necessity, and profound personal devotion converged to create an object that served multiple masters. It was not merely one thing, it was a grand prestige project for a struggling monastery, a formidable weapon against heresy, and quite possibly the physical manifestation of a soul's desperate quest for redemption. All of these motivations can coexist, each layer adding depth to our understanding of this medieval leviathan. First, consider it as a strategic tool of institutional power. The Podlages Monastery, a relatively small and new foundation, was operating in a highly competitive religious landscape. Kings and nobles bestowed wealth and land upon monasteries that could demonstrate their piety and intellectual significance. Creating the largest manuscript in the known world was a spectacular, undeniable statement of importance. This was a public relations masterstroke crafted from vellum and ink. It would have been a magnet for pilgrims and scholars, drawing them off the main roads to this specific monastic house. Wealthy patrons, impressed by such a display of devotion and capability, would have been far more inclined to make generous donations, securing the monastery's financial future. The inclusion of the Chronicle of Bohemia was a particularly savvy move, directly linking the monastery's identity to the history and glory of the kingdom itself. In this light, the Codex Gigas was a colossal investment in survival and relevance, a bid for immortality written in the most expensive and impressive medium available. But its purpose extends far beyond mere institutional branding. In an era defined by the Church's fierce struggle against heresy, the book also functions as a comprehensive arsenal of orthodox knowledge. Following the decrees of the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, which emphasized clerical education and the clear teaching of doctrine, the Codex Gigas provided a one-volume defense against error. By binding together the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, the authoritative histories of Josephus, and the foundational texts of the Benedictine order, it created an impenetrable fortress of approved learning. A remote monastery now possessed an unassailable reference library, ensuring that its teachings remained pure and its rituals correct. Even the terrifying portrait of the devil can be reinterpreted through this lens. Rather than a tribute, it becomes a powerful, orthodox warning. By placing the monstrous figure of evil directly opposite the glorious heavenly city, the manuscript visually reinforces a core theological truth. The threat of damnation is real, but it is ultimately contained and conquered by the promise of salvation. This was spiritual warfare made tangible, using the most vivid imagery possible to steel the faithful against temptation and doubt. This brings us to the most intimate and haunting layer of the manuscript's purpose, the possibility that it was an act of profound personal penance. While the historical record is silent on Herman the Recluse, the psychological evidence embedded in the script itself is overwhelming. To dedicate 20 or 30 years of one's life to a task of such monotonous, physically punishing intensity suggests a motivation far beyond professional duty or communal obligation. This was a labor that consumed a lifetime. Consider the mindset required. Every day for decades, the scribe would return to his desk, his world shrinking to the precise formation of each letter. This level of sustained, isolated focus is the behavior of someone seeking purification through suffering. The chronic pain in his back and hand, the eye strain from poor light, the sheer mental fatigue, all of it could have been willingly embraced as a form of atonement. In a world where sin was a palpable weight on the soul, the creation of this monumental book could have been conceived as a proportional act of expiation, a self-directed purgatory where the agony of the body was offered up to cleanse the spirit. The flawless consistency of the handwriting is not just a mark of skill, it is the fingerprint of an obsessive mind, one that may have found a desperate peace in the perfect, repetitive order of the text, using the controlled world of the page to quiet a tumultuous inner world of guilt or fear. The true genius of the Codex Gigas and the final clue to its purpose lies in its breathtaking synthesis of these seemingly contradictory elements. It is a text that effortlessly merges the sacred with the profane, not out of confusion, but from a holistic medieval worldview that saw no firm boundary between them. The orthodox prayers and the potentially unorthodox spells exist side by side because, to the monks who used it, they were simply different tools for navigating a perilous world. A prayer to a saint and a charm against fever were two sides of the same coin, both invoking supernatural power to protect the community. The book was therefore both a symbol of institutional power and a practical manual for daily survival. It was a beacon to attract pilgrims and a shield to ward off heresy. It was a testament to a monastery's pride and the lifelong penance of a single, anonymous scribe. This ability to embody multiple, powerful truths is what has cemented the Codex Gigas' enduring fascination. It transcends a single category, refusing to be pinned down as solely a Bible, an encyclopedia, or a book of dark magic. It is instead a perfect reflection of the medieval mind itself, a world where ambition and piety, fear and faith, the desire for prestige and the need for salvation were inextricably woven together into a single, colossal and unforgettable whole. This journey from a monastic scriptorium to the bright glare of modern media is a story in itself, revealing just how powerfully the Codex Gigas continues to haunt our collective imagination. Long confined to the hushed halls of academia, the manuscript has broken free, becoming a versatile icon in television, literature, and music, its legend morphing and adapting to fit our contemporary fears and fascinations. You can often find it featured in documentaries, though its treatment varies wildly. On one end of the spectrum, you have serious historical programs that meticulously detail its creation and context, treating it with the scholarly respect it deserves. On the other, it has become a staple on shows specializing in speculative history, where its legend is presented not as folklore but as potential evidence. In these formats, the single-night creation myth is often explored with dramatic recreations and ominous narration, not as a medieval allegory but as a genuine historical puzzle that might point to otherworldly intervention, effectively repackaging an 800-year-old superstition for a modern audience hungry for mystery. The world of video games has proven to be a particularly fertile ground for the Codex Gigas, where its concept can be transformed into an active, plot-driving artifact. In these digital realms, the manuscript is rarely a simple historical reference. It becomes a powerful magical item, a key that unlocks unspeakable powers or a weapon that can alter reality itself. Game designers strip the manuscript down to its core narrative elements, a massive book, written by a monk with the devil's help, containing forbidden knowledge, and then build entire quests around it. Players might be tasked with retrieving it from a ruined monastery, protecting it from a cult, or even using its spells in gameplay, literally channeling the dark power it supposedly contains. This interactive engagement allows people to not just learn about the legend, but to step inside it, making choices that directly relate to the book's mythical properties. It transforms the Codex from a passive object of study into an active participant in a new story, cementing its status as a symbol of ultimate power with a terrible cost. Literature, from pulp horror novels to sophisticated historical thrillers, has repeatedly used the Codex Gigas as a catalyst for adventure and terror. Authors are drawn to its tangible reality. Unlike a purely fictional grimoire, the fact that the Codex actually exists lends an immediate layer of credibility to their stories. In these narratives, the manuscript often serves as the source of a looming cataclysm. A character might decipher a forgotten prophecy from its pages, unleashing a plague of demons, or a secret society might be hunting for it to enact a ritual that will bring about the end of the world. The physical description of the book, its immense size, its shocking devil portrait, provides authors with built-in visceral imagery that requires little embellishment. The simple act of a character gingerly turning its massive pages builds a palpable sense of dread because the audience, now familiar with its legend, understands they are not just handling a book, but a potential portal to something ancient and malevolent. Perhaps nowhere is the Codex's iconic imagery more instantly leveraged than in the realm of heavy metal and dark alternative music. The genre has a long-standing love affair with themes of the occult, rebellion, and the macabre, and the full-page illustration of the devil from the Codex Gigas is a gift to album artists. Its stark, medieval, and genuinely unsettling depiction of Satan offers a different aesthetic from the more cartoonish or modern demonic imagery. It carries a weight of authenticity and history. Using this specific image on an album sleeve is a powerful statement. It connects the band's music to a legacy of forbidden knowledge and transgression that stretches back centuries. It suggests that their artistic exploration of dark themes is not a passing fad, but part of a much older, more profound dialogue about sin, power, and the nature of evil. The Codex's devil becomes a ready-made logo for a cultural movement built on challenging norms and confronting the shadowy aspects of existence. So why has this particular manuscript, and not one of the thousands of other medieval codices, achieved such enduring pop culture fame? The answer lies in a perfect storm of unique attributes. First is its undeniable physicality. It's not just an old book, it's the biggest old book. This superlative quality makes it inherently memorable and impressive. Then there is its breathtaking internal contradiction, the complete Word of God bound back to back with a monstrous portrait of his greatest adversary. This juxtaposition creates a narrative tension that is irresistibly compelling, suggesting a story too complex and dark for a simple explanation. The legend of Herman the Recluse provides that story in a perfectly packaged, emotionally resonant form. It's a classic Faustian bargain, a tale of ambition, desperation, and the price of power that transcends its medieval origins to speak directly to modern anxieties about success, compromise, and the things we are willing to do under pressure. The Codex Gigas endures because it is more than a historical artifact. It is a blank canvas upon which we continue to project our oldest and most persistent fears about the allure of forbidden knowledge and the hidden cost of greatness. After surviving fires, wars, and centuries of handling, the Codex Gigas now resides in one of the most secure and scientifically controlled environments on the planet, the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. Here, it is treated not merely as a historical artifact, but as a fragile, living entity whose 8 centuries of life demand constant, vigilant care. This is not a passive storage facility. It is an intensive care unit for cultural heritage, where a team of dedicated conservators acts as its guardian, fighting a silent, ongoing battle against the inevitable decay of time. The primary enemies are well known but relentless: light, fluctuations in temperature and humidity, and the slow chemical breakdown of the very materials that compose it. If the legend speaks of a demonic pact saving the book in a single night, the modern reality is a story of human dedication preserving it day by day for the future. The first and most critical line of defense is the climate-controlled vault where the manuscript rests. The room is maintained at a constant, cool temperature of 18 degrees Celsius, about 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and a relative humidity of 50%. These are not arbitrary numbers. They are the result of extensive scientific research into the preservation of organic materials. Vellum, being animal skin, is hygroscopic. It absorbs and releases moisture from the air. If the air is too dry, the vellum becomes brittle and can crack, much like old leather. If the air is too humid, it becomes a breeding ground for mold and mildew, which can permanently stain and degrade the pages. The stable environment prevents this constant expansion and contraction, keeping the vellum in a state of suspended animation, slowing its natural aging process to a crawl. Even the light is a carefully managed threat. Prolonged exposure, especially to the ultraviolet rays in normal light, causes iron gall ink to fade and the vibrant pigments in the illuminations to lose their brilliance. For this reason, the codex is kept in darkness, only being brought out under strict, low-lux LED lighting for brief periods of study or for its rare public exhibitions. When the codex must be moved, even within the library, the process is a meticulously choreographed operation. It is housed in a custom-made, double-walled conservation box crafted from acid-free archival cardboard. This casing acts as a microclimate, providing an additional buffer against any sudden shifts in the room's atmosphere. Lifting the book is a two-person job, requiring gloves to protect the pages from the natural oils on human hands. Every movement is slow and deliberate, with the book fully supported to prevent any stress on its ancient binding. This is not just about protecting it from a catastrophic drop. It is about preventing the cumulative, microscopic damage from flexing the spine or straining the centuries-old sewing that holds the gatherings together. The goal is to ensure that every single time the book is handled, it is done in a way that could, in theory, be repeated for another 800 years without causing harm. The work of the conservators themselves is a blend of high science and painstaking, almost surgical artistry. They are the physicians to this 800-year-old patient, and their first rule is a form of the Hippocratic Oath: first, do no harm. Any treatment must be reversible, using materials and adhesives that can be safely removed by future conservators with more advanced techniques. When a tear in the vellum requires repair, they don't use ordinary glue or tape. Instead, they might use a specially prepared gelatin or a Japanese paper called kozo, which is incredibly strong yet thin and chemically stable. The repair is applied with the lightest touch, often using magnification to ensure perfect alignment. Their toolkit contains not hammers and nails, but ultrasonic misters, specialized suction tables, and pH testing pens to monitor the acidity of the pages. They are not restoring the book to look new. They are stabilizing its current state, honoring its age and the journey it represents. Every crease, every faint stain from a monk's hand centuries ago is part of its story, and their mission is to protect that story, not erase it. This monumental effort raises a profound philosophical question about our relationship with such irreplaceable objects. The Codex Gigas, for all its legendary power, is inherently ephemeral. The organic processes of decay, slowed to a crawl by science, continue nonetheless. The iron gall ink, while remarkably durable, is acidic and can, over centuries, slowly eat through the vellum it rests upon, a phenomenon known as ink corrosion. The very act of allowing scholars to study it or the public to gaze upon it introduces risk. So why commit such immense resources to this single book? The answer lies in understanding that the Codex is a vital link in the chain of human knowledge and cultural memory. It is a primary source that tells us not only about theology and history, but about medieval chemistry, art, economics, and daily monastic life. By preserving it, we are not just saving a relic, we are maintaining a direct, tangible connection to our collective past. We are ensuring that future generations, with tools and questions we cannot yet imagine, will have the same opportunity to stand in the presence of this giant and hear its silent, enduring story. The Conservation Lab, with its humming climate controls and delicate tools, is therefore a bridge across time, a testament to our commitment to pass on the marvels of human achievement, one carefully monitored page at a time. While the Codex Gigas is a staggering achievement, it didn't exist in a vacuum. To truly appreciate its place in history, we need to place it alongside the few other surviving giant manuscripts of the medieval world, which shows us that its uniqueness lies not just in its size, but in the extraordinary and peculiar combination of features it possesses. Consider the Codex Amiatinus, created in Anglo-Saxon England around the year 716. This book is a true giant, weighing in at over 50 kilograms or around 110 pounds. Like the Codex Gigas, it contains the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, but here the similarities end. The Amiatinus was created as a prestigious gift, a single-volume Bible intended for the Pope in Rome, designed to showcase the learning and piety of the Northumbrian monasteries. Its contents are purely sacred. It is a Bible and little else, a magnificent but singularly focused object of devotion, meant to impress the highest authority in the Christian world. Then there is the Great Bible of Mainz, produced in Germany around the middle of the 13th century, almost exactly contemporary with the Codex Gigas. This is another colossal Bible, famous for its beautiful and intricate illuminations. It was likely created for a powerful archbishop or a wealthy cathedral, serving as a potent symbol of ecclesiastical authority and a centerpiece for liturgical ceremony. Again, its purpose was primarily display and ritual within a strictly religious context. What becomes immediately clear when we line up these giants is a shared tradition. Creating enormous books was a recognized, though incredibly expensive, way for a religious institution to assert its importance, its orthodoxy, and its wealth. They were the blockbuster productions of their day, statements of power written in skin and ink. In this company, the Codex Gigas fits the profile of a prestige project, but it immediately begins to stand apart when we look beyond its spine. The critical distinction, and what makes the Codex Gigas an absolute outlier, is its breathtakingly encyclopedic scope. Where the Amiatinus and the Mainz Bible are masterpieces of focused devotion, the Codex Gigas is a chaotic, magnificent universe in a single volume. It doesn't stop at the Bible. It crashes through the boundaries of the sacred to embrace the entire known world of its time. It contains the historical works of Josephus, providing a classical, secular context for the biblical narrative. It includes the Chronicle of Bohemia, rooting itself in local political history. Then it veers into the starkly practical with its medical texts and healing spells, and grounds itself in the daily life of a monastery with its calendar and necrology. This is not just a Bible, it is a library, an archive, a medical journal, and a historical record, all bound together under one cover. No other giant manuscript from this period attempts such a comprehensive fusion of the divine and the worldly. The others aim for the heavens. The Codex Gigas seeks to document everything from the heavens down to the herbs in the garden and the fevers of the monks tending them. And this brings us to the final, unforgettable ingredient that separates the Codex Gigas from every other book on the shelf, its demonic legend. The Great Bible of Mainz has no ghost stories clinging to its pages. The Codex Amiatinus is not whispered about as a cursed object. Their histories are of piety, craftsmanship, and ownership. The Codex Gigas, by contrast, is permanently haunted. The chilling tale of Herman the Recluse and his pact with the devil, paired with that terrifying full-page portrait, created a reputation that transcended its physical form. This legend transformed it from a mere book into a character, an object of fear and fascination that captivated the popular imagination for centuries. This narrative of a soul bartered for knowledge tapped into deep, universal fears about ambition, sin, and the price of forbidden power, themes that resonated long after the names of its abbots and scribes were forgotten. So, when we step back, we see that the Codex Gigas is a behemoth among behemoths, not for any one quality, but for a unique convergence of all of them. It has the immense size of its peers, yet it couples that with an encyclopedic ambition that none of them possessed. And on top of that staggering physical and intellectual achievement, it carries the burden of a dark, enduring myth that ensured its notoriety would far outstrip its function as a simple reference work. It is this potent, three-part recipe of colossal scale, universal knowledge, and supernatural stigma that makes it a singular monument in the history of the book. It stands as a testament to what happens when human ambition pushes beyond the creation of a mere object of prestige and strives instead to capture an entire worldview, only to have that very ambition spawn a legend so powerful that it would forever define the object itself. This very question strikes at the heart of the manuscript's paradoxical nature. Given its fearsome reputation and the inclusion of content that could easily be branded as superstitious or even heretical, its survival through centuries of religious purges and book burnings feels like a historical anomaly. The most straightforward answer lies in its staggering material worth. We must remember that in the medieval world, an object like the Codex Gigas was not just a collection of ideas, it was a physical asset of almost unimaginable value. The cost of its creation, the 160 donkey skins, the liters of carefully brewed ink, the precious minerals ground into pigment, and the sheets of pure gold leaf, represented a fortune. Destroying it would have been the equivalent of setting a king's ransom on fire, an act of wanton destruction that even the most fervent inquisitor might have hesitated to commit. It was a treasure of the church itself, a magnificent display of its own power and piety, and to obliterate such a masterpiece would have been seen as a sacrilege against the very human and divine effort that produced it. Furthermore, its primary and most prominent content was, without a doubt, profoundly orthodox. The foundational text of the entire manuscript is the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, the authorized word of God for Western Christendom. This was its ultimate shield. A church official examining the book would first and foremost see a magnificent copy of the scriptures, a work that glorified God on a scale few others could match. Any questionable elements, the spells, the medical charms, even the devil's portrait, were contained within this sacred framework. It would have been a bold and theologically risky move to condemn and destroy a complete Bible, the holiest of texts, simply because of some peculiar additions. The orthodox core essentially provided diplomatic immunity for the more unorthodox peripheral content, forcing authorities to weigh the value of the whole against the potential danger of its parts. The book's sheer scale worked in its favor here too. Its intimidating size made it difficult to casually inspect or dismiss, demanding a level of engagement that likely led to more nuanced judgments than a snap decision to burn it. We also have to consider the context of time and place. The early 13th century, when the Codex was created, existed in a different theological climate than the later periods of the Inquisition. The line between accepted pious practice and condemned superstition was often blurry and regionally specific. What might have been viewed in Rome as a questionable folk charm could have been seen in a rural Bohemian monastery as a perfectly normal part of the spiritual arsenal against daily suffering. The spells within the Codex are a perfect example of this ambiguity. They are not invocations to pagan gods, they are overwhelmingly Christian in their language, calling upon the Trinity and the saints. For the local monks who compiled them, these were likely not seen as heretical magic, but as powerful prayers augmented with ritual actions, a form of applied faith. It's entirely possible that for much of its early history, the contents we now find so suspicious were simply not interpreted as a direct challenge to church doctrine, but rather as an extensive, if eclectic, collection of useful knowledge for running a monastery. Another fascinating possibility is that the book's own terrifying legend may have inadvertently protected it. The story of its diabolical origins, while fueling its notoriety, also served as a powerful warning. To destroy the Codex Gigas could have been perceived as a dangerously provocative act. If the legend were true, what would happen to the person who tried to burn a book written by the devil's own hand? This superstitious fear would have created a kind of protective aura around the manuscript, making people hesitant to tamper with it. It was safer to keep it chained to a lectern, contained and observed, than to risk unleashing whatever power it might hold by attempting its annihilation. Its survival, therefore, is not just a story of rational calculation, but also one of primal fear, a testament to the power of a good story to preserve even the things it condemns. Ultimately, the Codex Gigas survived because it was a masterpiece of contradictions that defied easy categorization. It was too valuable to destroy, too holy to condemn outright, and too ambiguous to be neatly labeled. Its journey from a Bohemian monastery to a royal library in Stockholm also played a role, removing it from the immediate reach of Central European religious authorities during the most intense periods of the Counter-Reformation, and placing it in the hands of secular collectors who valued it more for its curiosity and antiquity than for its doctrinal purity. Its continued existence is a powerful reminder that history is rarely a simple tale of good versus evil, orthodoxy versus heresy. It is a complex negotiation of value, power, and belief, and the Codex Gigas, by embodying all of these tensions in one colossal form, managed to navigate the perilous currents of history and emerge on the other side, a permanent enigma that challenges our understanding of the medieval world. Yet, the sheer scale and mystery of the Codex Gigas are so potent that they inevitably spill over the boundaries of conventional history, inviting speculation that ventures into the truly extraordinary. For some, the established narrative of monastic dedication, however awe-inspiring, feels insufficient to explain such a monumental artifact. This has given rise to a fascinating undercurrent of fringe theories that reimagine the book's origins through a far more cosmic lens. One of the most persistent, though entirely unsubstantiated, ideas proposes that the manuscript is not a product of earthly knowledge at all, but a relic of alien intervention. Proponents of this view suggest that the scribe, whether Herman or another, did not make a pact with a theological devil, but encountered an extraterrestrial intelligence. In this reinterpretation, the supernatural assistance that filled the pages in a single night was actually advanced technology, and the encyclopedic nature of the content spanning scripture, history, and science reflects a transfer of knowledge from a civilization far beyond our own. The terrifying devil illustration, rather than depicting a fallen angel, is reimagined as a distorted representation of this otherworldly visitor, its alien features misinterpreted by a medieval mind that had no framework for such an encounter beyond its own religious iconography. This theory, while a complete departure from academic consensus, speaks to a deep-seated human desire to explain the inexplicable by reaching for answers that transcend our historical understanding. Parallel to these cosmic speculations runs another captivating thread: the idea that the Codex Gigas is in fact a complex encrypted document, a medieval counterpart to the famously indecipherable Voynich manuscript. This theory posits that the straightforward Latin text is merely a surface-level facade, and that the true secrets of the book are concealed within a sophisticated cipher. Speculators might point to the intricate initials, the specific patterns of the illuminations, or even the seemingly random distribution of certain words as potential carriers of a hidden code. The prospect is undeniably alluring. What if the personal confession of the scribe, the true reason for his immense undertaking, or even esoteric knowledge deemed too dangerous for the public, is encrypted within the very pages we've been studying for centuries? The idea transforms the manuscript from a passive repository of knowledge into an active puzzle, a locked box waiting for the right key. Modern codebreakers and amateur cryptographers have occasionally turned their attention to the Codex, applying statistical analysis and computational power in search of patterns that defy chance, though to date no verifiable, coherent code has ever been substantiated by scholarly review. It is crucial, however, to understand why these theories, while captivating, remain firmly outside the realm of mainstream scholarship. The fundamental principle of historical analysis, known as Occam's razor, suggests that the simplest explanation consistent with the evidence is usually the correct one. In the case of the Codex Gigas, the simplest explanation, though it involves decades of human labor and immense institutional resources, is perfectly congruent with everything we know about 13th century monastic culture, economics, and technology. We have the physical vellum made from donkey skins using known period techniques. We have the iron gall ink and the mineral pigments, all traceable to contemporary trade routes. We have the historical context of Podlagius Monastery and its probable motives. The alien intervention theory, by contrast, introduces an entity for which there is no physical or historical evidence whatsoever. Similarly, the hidden code theory, while less fantastical, faces a significant logical hurdle. Why would a monk or a monastery go to the incredible effort of creating a perfectly legitimate and monumental book of immense orthodox value, only to bury a secret message within it that would require a cipher system centuries ahead of its time to conceal? The practical utility of such an act is difficult to reconcile with the book's primary and obvious function as a prestige object and reference library. Yet, to dismiss these speculations entirely would be to miss their true significance. They are not serious historical hypotheses, but rather a testament to the profound and enduring power of the Codex Gigas as a cultural symbol. The very fact that it can inspire such wild and imaginative theories proves that it has achieved a mythic status that transcends its physical form. It has become a blank screen upon which we project our own modern mysteries and anxieties about forgotten knowledge and unseen forces. The alien theory reflects our contemporary fascination with the possibility of other intelligences and the ancient astronaut hypothesis, while the hidden code narrative taps directly into our digital age preoccupation with data, encryption, and the secrets that might be hiding in plain sight. These ideas show that the manuscript continues to do what it has always done: challenge the boundaries of what we believe is possible and force us to confront the limits of our understanding. Ultimately, these fringe theories serve to highlight the sheer magnitude of the human achievement that the Codex represents. The reality that a group of people, using the materials and knowledge of their time, could produce something so vast and complex through sheer will and devotion is in many ways more staggering than any supernatural or extraterrestrial explanation. The wildest speculation ultimately circles back to reinforce the wonder of the historical truth. By acknowledging these imaginative interpretations, we don't validate them as fact, but we do honor the deep and abiding sense of awe that the giant book commands. It is this awe, this refusal to be easily categorized or explained away, that has cemented the Codex Gigas not just as a historical artifact, but as a permanent fixture in the human imagination, a colossal question mark that continues to provoke curiosity, debate, and wonder across the centuries. Even after centuries of scrutiny and the full force of modern science, the Codex Gigas guards its most intimate secrets with a stubborn silence. We have carbon-dated its vellum, analyzed its inks with X-rays, and peered into its layers with multispectral imaging, yet the fundamental human questions, the who and the why, remain shrouded in a mist that technology cannot dispel. The greatest of these mysteries is the identity of the scribe himself. We speak of a single primary hand, a person of almost unimaginable focus, but we do not know his name. Was he the legendary Herman, a figure for whom no historical record exists outside of the folktale? Or was he an anonymous brother whose devotion was so complete that he sought no glory, his identity subsumed entirely into the monumental work he created? We can analyze the consistent pressure of his quill and the rhythm of his letters, but the man behind the hand is a ghost. We do not know if he was young or old, if he was driven by a fierce pride, a profound piety, or a desperate need for atonement. His personality, his joys, his moments of despair as he worked year after year, these are lost to us, leaving a void where a biography should be. Then there is the haunting physical void within the book itself, the missing pages. We know they were cut out, sliced from the spine with deliberate intent. The most compelling theory suggests they contain the rule of Saint Benedict, the very constitution of monastic life, likely accompanied by a prologue specific to the Podlages monastery. Their removal could have been a simple, cynical act to sever the book from its original home, making it easier for a new owner to claim it, but the precision of the excision invites more tantalizing speculation. What if those pages held something more, marginal notes confessing a heresy, a personal dedication from the scribe, or even financial records that pointed to a controversial patron? The removal of those folios was an act of censorship, a deliberate editing of the book's history. We are left forever wondering what was so dangerous, so revealing, that it had to be physically carved out of the world's largest manuscript, creating a permanent black hole of information at its very core. This leads us directly to the enigma of motivation, the fuel that powered this decades-long marathon of the spirit. We can talk about institutional prestige and political maneuvering, but those are the motivations of a community. The personal driving force of the scribe is a separate, deeply psychological puzzle. Did he awake each morning for 20 years with a serene heart, viewing his work as a continuous prayer, a literal incarnation of the Benedictine ideal of holy labor? Or was his a path of grim determination, a self-imposed penance for a sin so grave that only a lifetime of excruciating, focused toil could hope to atone for it? The relentless perfection of the script could be read as the output of a deeply scrupulous mind, one where a tiny flaw in a letter was perceived as a moral failure. Perhaps the project was not born from piety at all, but from a colossal, almost arrogant ambition, a desire to create something that would dwarf all other books, a personal legacy so immense that it would guarantee his name, even if unknown, would echo through history. We can see the results of his motivation etched into every page, but the nature of the fire that burned within him is a matter of interpretation, a story we can never fully read. And what are we to make of the book's most famous resident, the towering portrait of the devil? Its intended meaning is a riddle that continues to divide scholars. The orthodox interpretation, supported by its placement opposite the heavenly city, is that it serves as a stark warning. It visually represents the evil that Christ has conquered, a monstrous foe who is contained and neutralized by the sacred texts that surround him. In this view, the image is a tool of orthodox teaching, designed to strengthen faith by illustrating the terrifying reality of damnation. But could there have been a more nuanced or even ambiguous purpose? In the complex spiritual landscape of the Middle Ages, where folk belief and official doctrine bled into one another, is it possible the image was also understood to have an apotropaic function, a powerful evil eye meant to actually ward off evil by displaying its likeness? Or, at its most controversial, does its stunning solo presentation suggest a flicker of something else? While there is no evidence of actual devil worship, the image's raw power and central placement force us to ask if the scribe and his community held a more complex, almost respectful, fear of the devil's power, acknowledging him as a formidable cosmic adversary rather than a simply vanquished one. The illustration refuses to be a simple illustration. It demands a reaction, and we cannot be certain the reaction it provokes in us is the one it was meant to provoke in a 13th century monk. This is the ultimate power of the Codex Gigas, and the reason it continues to captivate us long after other medieval manuscripts have become mere subjects of academic study. It is not the solved mysteries that hold our fascination, but the persistent, unanswerable ones. Our scientific tools can tell us about the composition of its materials, but they cannot tell us about the composition of its creator's soul. They can show us the physical evidence of censorship, but they cannot recover the lost words. They can confirm the timeline of its creation, but they cannot reveal the emotional landscape of those 20 long years. The human story at the heart of this giant book remains tantalizingly out of reach, a symphony played in a minor key that we can only just barely hear. It is this profound and beautiful incompleteness, this invitation to forever wonder and speculate, that transforms the Codex Gigas from a relic of the past into a living, breathing puzzle. It ensures that we are not merely observers of history, but active participants in its ongoing mystery, forever drawn back to its massive pages to ask the questions that may never have answers. So here we are at the end of our investigation, having journeyed together from the shadowy realm of chilling legend into the clear, if complex, light of historical fact. We began with a story whispered through the centuries, a tale of a desperate monk, a devil's pact, and a book written in a single, impossible night. That narrative, while irresistibly compelling, was our starting point, not our destination. By following the evidence, the forensic analysis of the handwriting, the chemical fingerprint of the inks and pigments, the local names in the necrology, and the political reality of 13th century Bohemia, we've been able to construct a far more human, and in many ways more astonishing, truth. The Codex Gigas was not a supernatural feat, but a superhuman one born from the immense, sustained labor of a single, astonishingly dedicated scribe working for 20 to 30 years, likely within the walls of the Podlages monastery. It was a grand prestige project, a strategic gambit by a monastic community to secure its place in the world, funded by immense resources and intended to be a one-stop library of everything from sacred scripture to practical medicine. The true secret of the Devil's Bible, then, is not hidden in a coded message or a demonic signature. It is woven into the very fabric of its being. It's found in the relentless consistency of a single hand across millions of letters, a testament to a focus so absolute it borders on the obsessive. It's revealed in the brilliant, deliberate contrast of the devil's portrait facing the heavenly city, showing us a mind sophisticated enough to use the image of ultimate evil to highlight the glory of divine salvation. The secret lies in the book's breathtaking synthesis of the sacred and the profane, where the complete Latin Vulgate Bible sits comfortably alongside folk healing charms and historical chronicles, reflecting a medieval worldview that saw no firm boundary between the spiritual and the practical forces shaping daily life. This was not a book of dark magic. It was an attempt to capture an entire universe of knowledge within a single, monumental volume. Ultimately, the legacy of the Codex Gigas is a profound meditation on the extremes of the human spirit. It stands as a permanent monument to what we are capable of when driven by devotion, by ambition, by a need for atonement, or by a simple, unwavering will to create something that will endure long after we are gone. The real pact was not with a fallen angel, but with time itself, a promise made by one human being to dedicate the prime of his life to a silent, back-breaking, and glorious task. The mystery that remains is not about supernatural intervention, but about the silent, unreachable mind of the scribe. What inner fire could possibly burn so steadily for decades? Was it the serene focus of a saint, the grim determination of a sinner seeking redemption, or the colossal ego of an artist determined to outshine all who came before him? We can analyze the ink and the vellum, but the motivation of the heart is a secret the Codex has kept for 800 years. And so, as we look upon this colossal book today, safely preserved behind glass in Stockholm, we are not just looking at a historical artifact. We are confronting a mirror held up to our own potential for greatness and obsession. It challenges our own definitions of what is possible, asking us how far we would go for something we truly believe in. The legend of the Devil's Bible will always be a part of its power, a thrilling story that captures our imagination. But the reality, the truth of human hands, human faith, and human endurance is, in the end, the more powerful magic. This leaves us with a final question to ponder, a mystery that each of us must now answer for ourselves. After everything we've uncovered, after separating the dark myth from the verifiable history, what do you believe? Was the Codex Gigas the work of a saint, a sinner, or something else entirely? Let us know your theories in the comments below.